did you know that starches have pretty much the same effect or very similar effect on the body as sugar? So a lot of patients would tell me, but I don't eat sweets, so I don't understand how come my sugar is high. Or once somebody said, I don't even like sweets. I don't know how I got diabetes. So why is it that some people would have these serious blood sugar problems even though they barely ever eat candy? Well, that's because starch is sugar, but in another form. Specifically, starch is a string of glucose molecules, whereas sugar could be straight glucose, or the table sugar as we know it is half and half glucose and fructose, right? So generally speaking, table sugar, that's going to give you half fructose, half glucose in the bloodstream. Glucose is what we measure for, looking at diabetes monitoring and so on and so forth, right? But where starch is concerned, when that is broken down, that breaks down to glucose, pure glucose, because it's just a string of glucose molecules, right? Now, depending on the starch and how complex it is, meaning how much fiber is incorporated in that starch, that will determine how quickly it breaks down into glucose, how much of that glucose gets absorbed into the bloodstream. If it's a very complex, unrefined starch, like something with a lot of fiber, then it means it'll take a bit of time to break down and get digested and then get absorbed into bloodstream and so on and so forth, right? And in fact, having fiber with it, and maybe even other things like fat containing foods together in the gastrointestinal tract, would actually possibly even prevent all of that glucose from being absorbed into the bloodstream. So the quality really of the types of starch that you have really matters, right? So it's not necessarily about the quantity per se in many occasions, but it's the quality. Now, if you're having something that's really refined, like a refined starch, like for example pasta, that's a classic example, or bread, even whole wheat bread to an extent, as I didn't say whole grain, but whole wheat bread, it's pretty similar in terms of what it does to the body. It's pretty similar to white flour bread, right? Crackers, biscuits, all these things, pretty refined, and so they're going to be broken down and you're going to get this flood of glucose into your bloodstream. And believe it or not, when we talk about glycemic index, that is basically a measure of how high a certain food increases the blood glucose by. Now, believe it or not, starches, refined starches, pastas, breads, biscuits, and so on, those things will actually carry up your blood sugar higher than sugar, believe it or not. Why is that? Because sugar is 50-50 glucose and fructose, whereas starch is almost 100% glucose minus whatever fiber might be in it, right? So for those persons who are concerned and confused, right, and again I see that in the hospital every day, where somebody would swear like, I didn't have any sweet, I didn't cheat, I didn't have a soda, right? And then we ask them, okay, specifically tell me what you had to eat, right? And oftentimes it was a big role, because sadly, even though in the hospital really we should be promoting health, but unfortunately we, the medical providers, don't have as much say, or actually we don't have any say in what the dietary department provides, right? So we make orders of a diabetic diet and so on, but unfortunately we still see French toast coming on the trays of a diabetic, or bread rolls coming on the trays, a lot of spaghetti, and it's just regular white flour spaghetti, a lot of white rice, significant amounts of oatmeal, and oatmeal is another starch, right? And so we see all this starch, and so a patient would tell me, they had pasta for lunch and a bread roll and a tiny bit of salad, so they really, and it's a little bit of meat sauce over the pasta. So when you look at everything together, they didn't really have a lot of fiber going with that pasta. They probably didn't have enough of protein, enough of the healthy fats going with it. And so what was in that meal was essentially a bulk of starch. And so even though they had no sweetened drinks, their blood sugars went up into the 200s or 300s, depending on the individual situation. And we just keep chasing these blood sugars. So for those of you who you worry, like you're confused, your blood sugar, your doses of insulin keep having to be increased, you're doing what you're told, and you're feeling all despondent, what you need to look at and consider is, am I having a lot of starch? How much starch am I having? And I know, to an extent we have to have some amount of starch, but look at the quality of that starch. And also, if you're having refined starch, you have to make sure you put a lot of fiber with that so that you don't get all of that starch being absorbed all at once into your bloodstream and carrying up your blood sugar drastically. Because every time you have your blood sugar going up, you will find that your numbers, specifically hemoglobin A1C for diabetics, you would know what I'm talking about, or even for pre-diabetics who are monitoring the hemoglobin A1C, you will find that that number will continue to go up, and so your doctor or healthcare provider will have no choice but to keep increasing your doses of medications. Okay, so pay attention to the starch. It's probably, yes, it's not the sugar. In many cases it's going to be the starch, but you need to focus on that and put other things on your plate or incorporate other things into your diet to crowd that starch out so that you don't have to suffer with these persisting increases in glucose, right? So there you have it. That's why, yes, I mean, I mostly, I believe my patients when they tell me truly they're not having sweets, because I recognize that it's the starch that's causing these problems. And because it doesn't taste sweet, it's really hard to comprehend and understand and appreciate that the starch is going to carry up your blood sugar just as much as sweet tasting things, if not more. I hope you all found this valuable. Leave a comment or share this video with other persons. All right.